Добрий день усім присутнім в прес-залі.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, online and offline. Ukrainian Crisis Media Center is online with a briefing of UNESCO on the preliminary evaluation of the damages in Odesa. And I would like to introduce Chiara Dezzi Bardeski, the chief of the UNESCO desk in Kiev.
And thank you for joining us. Thanks also to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center to hosting this media briefing. Thank you for being so numerous. I'm Chiara Dezzi Bardeski. I'm the chief of the UNESCO desk in Ukraine, based here in Kiev. We will provide an overview briefing of the UNESCO mission, and meanwhile you will see also some images on the screen behind me. I will also try to comment some of them, but first let me reiterate that UNESCO wishes to express its support to the people of Odesa and conveys its sincere condolence to the families of victims, not only of Odesa, but Lviv and Ukraine more in general, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This briefing will address three main questions. Why UNESCO deployed the technical mission to Odesa? What are the outcomes of this mission and its unfolding? And the third also, what next? What are prospects now, especially in the very short time after this mission? So, why this mission has been deployed? In the last months, we have been witnessing an escalation of violence against culture and cultural properties in general. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, UNESCO was able to verify damages for more than 274 sites currently all across Ukraine. Since 19th of July, the Russian armed forces has launched a series of attacks against Odesa, resulting in civilian casualties and extensive damages to civilian infrastructures, including cultural and religious sites. The first attack occurred, as you know, on 20th of July and damaged several buildings, including several museums inside the World Heritage property of Odesa, notably the Odessa Archaeological Museum, the Odessa Maritime Museums, and the Odessa Literature Museums. All these properties that I mentioned have been previously marked by UNESCO and local authorities with the blue shields, the distinctive emblem of the 1954 Hague Convention. This first attack took place just 2 weeks after the strike that destroyed historic buildings in Lviv buffer zone of the World Heritage Site. It was actually the second in date to hit an area protected under the World Heritage Convention, which could be also considered a violation of the 1954 Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in events of armed conflict. This strike also coincided with the destruction 100 kilometers away of a cultural center of folk art and art education in the city of Mykolaiv the same day. The second attack occurred in the very early hours of the 23rd of July and hit several cultural sites in the city center of Odessa, home of the World Heritage Property named the Historic Center of Odessa. This attack took the life of at least 2 people, several injured people, and damaged a number of significant cultural sites, including the Transfiguration Cathedral, the first and foremost Orthodox church in Odessa, founded at the end of 18th century in 1794 and then reconstructed recently. The cathedral has a deep religious and spiritual importance for the people of Odessa. Both attacks have been immediately strongly condemned by Audrey Azoulay, UNESCO Director General. Also, the UN Secretary General has condemned these Russian attacks to the city. And in fact, UNESCO issued 2 statements condemning the targeting of cultural property and urging the Russian Federation to take meaningful action to comply with its obligations under international law, notably the 2 conventions that I already mentioned, the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, and the 1972 Convention concerning the protection of world, cultural, and natural heritage. UNESCO has also, in this occasion, recalled that intentional destruction of cultural sites may amount to war crime, as acknowledged also by the UN Security Council, of which the Russian Federation is a permanent member, in its resolution 2347 of 2017. The mission, as in this statement, the Director General has also announced the deployment of an international expert mission to Odessa in order to consolidate a comprehensive damage assessment of both building and museum's collection, and to prepare for necessary emergency measures that are essential to stabilize and protect from future deterioration. This mission was deployed to Odessa on the basis of Article 23 of the 1954 Hague Convention that gives a mandate to UNESCO on its own initiative to establishing a UNESCO international expert group to conduct a technical assessment on damages inflicted on cultural and religious sites. So the objectives of the mission has been twofold. From one side, to conduct a comprehensive technical assessment of damages inflicted on cultural and religious properties, and in particular after the 2 missile strikes carried out between 20 and 23rd of July, as I mentioned. And this actually included site inventory and documentation, mainly integrating also in initial assessment on structural integrity, visual inspection of structural stabilities to determine the extent of damages. You have here behind some images passing off these buildings. In this image you can see the Solomon complex in one of the main roads of Odesa, but also assessment of collection, preliminary assessment also in terms of the impact of damage to the cultural and religious property, which are part of the nature of the nomination of Odesa, its outstanding universal value as architectural urban fabric, and at the same time also to identify urgent measures which need to be proposed urgently and to be enhanced to protect such heritage from further deterioration. So the output of this assessment will be a comprehensive report detailing the findings, assessment, and recommendation of the experts. This report will be also, in a way, once produced, will serve two purposes. The first is, on one hand, it will be submitted to the 15th meeting of the High Contracting Parties of the 1954 Hague Convention, which is scheduled on 11th of December this year. And this report will be part of the Secretariat report at this meeting. So, but at the same time, this report may also inform the report on the state of conservation of the World Heritage property, which will be brought to the attention of the World Heritage Committee at its 46th session in 2024. This is on one side, in the more long-term prospects, but in the very short term, as I already mentioned, this report will guide very urgent intervention and detailed evidence-based understanding of needs that will need to be responded in this time. So mission, we spoke about reason, the objective of the mission. What are the outcome? Which outcome for this mission? The mission actually took place, as I mentioned, from 29th of July to 1st of August. It was composed by several experts. I was asked to lead this mission to Odesa. It's a mission which entails international experts of different nationalities, including representatives from ICROM and ICROM, the two advisory bodies to the 1972 convention. The mission is completed in a way, but still work is ongoing. And actually, during the mission had first visited Odesa Historic Center to gain first-hand information and to conduct on-site evaluation of the damaged building and architectural fabric. The mission also met and exchanged with the city council, regional military administration, and representative of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, representative of technical bodies operating as a first aider in and respondent in the city. Entities such as the Academy of Construction, several cultural NGOs operating in this field in Odesa. In particular, the meeting with the Academy of Construction focused on the structural report of the cathedral. You have here, while I'm speaking, some of these images of this assessment. And I have to say that personally I was astounded to witness the determination of many technical bodies and the resilience of these actors and even citizens to amid these distractions, and their ability and their willingness to contribute to the, you can see, to cleaning debris and protecting what remains of the cathedral. In this image, you can also see that the mission didn't limited to document, but also started in a rapid response, but also started some more long-term analysis, and we initiate for several buildings a 3D laser scanning, which is very important also as basis to inform any stabilization project, conservation, and even future reconstruction. So even if it's only preliminary results, we wanted to give you today a very first overview of damages that we were able to verify during the mission on the ground. So the first, I would say, is related to the widespread extent of damage. From the visit, is it clear that the magnitude of the impact on the historic city center is wider than what initially expected. We have been able to put together through the inputs and the documentation prepared by Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, City Council and expert, a list of 52 heritage buildings which were hit during the first and the second, namely the 20th and 23rd. So it's already very consistent. The second observation is that beyond the individual, the punctual properties, the impact of these attacks has also affected sectors of the historic urban fabric, which are part, as I said, of the attributes of its nomination, meaning its outstanding values as property, as Odesa Historic Center, and which was nominated, as you know, in January 23. These sectors are often organized around public spaces, spaces which have been equally damaged, and in a way that are made of what we call minor vernacular, sometimes architecture feature, not per se listed, so not entering this list of heritage building of local or national relevance, but embedded with historic legacy and values for communities living in the areas. And we speak about tangible heritage, but when we speak about communities, we have also to consider the impact on living heritage, all histories, all values, community ties which are linked to this space, and also disruption of these practices that will be impacted in a way over time from now on due to this repeated attack. Additionally, structurally speaking, the damaged units are clustered. Often they shared walls, structural elements. So these structures are also collaborating together. So you can understand how the punctual damage on one building are affecting more widening in areas and neighboring building. And so this is another important consideration while looking at impact on the universal outstanding value of the site. Magnitude of impact and damage, if we look at these buildings. The mission during this time could verify in detail only 10 of these buildings, which were those more severely impacted, and some of them also of national importance, from this list that I mentioned. And for all these buildings that we visited, the majority are envisaged as severely damaged, meaning that the property is damaged more than 60% of this consistency, of this fabric, among which the cathedral, and but also other buildings, among which, for instance, House of Scientists, Literature Museum, to mention some of them. Another consideration is that due to repeated attacks, some of these historic buildings have become more vulnerable and therefore are at risk of significant damage caused by explosion shock and vibration if new attack will occur and it hit them. The image that you see here are on the screen are some of the visuals coming out from this detailed 3D laser scanning. Here in particular, we are it's related to the House of Scientists. You can see how detailed this technique can be, also in terms of finishing measures and many elements, architectural features that are required to inform a restoration project. Another aspect which came out from the preliminary assessment is the need to enforce protocols for emergency intervention. And actually the UNESCO expert mission to Odesa noticed that this efficiency of emergency intervention shall be enhanced, and first aid and risk prevention also need to be strengthened to reduce vulnerability of damaged cultural heritage in case of further attacks. The expert mission now is currently finalizing this report that will be made available in December this year. What meanwhile next? Awaiting the report and awaiting subsequent phases that will be linked to the publication and the presentation of this report at the meeting in December. As of today, a series of urgent action have been launched. First, as you have been seeing already on this screen, a detailed documentation of the current state, which is crucial, as we said, to inform a stabilization, conservation, and future restoration plan, has started. And during the mission, the UNESCO expert has already started producing this 3D laser scanning of some of this severely damaged property, among which the House of Scientists, the residences that you see here, which are very closely located to the House of Scientists, for instance, but also the cathedral. One action. At the same time, through its multi-donor Heritage Emergency Fund, UNESCO has just secured urgent funding to support the very first upcoming work in the next weeks for work for key needs and to ensure this action with a view to enhancing the protection of these heritage buildings vis-à-vis risk of explosions. These measures actually are contemplating several measures, starting from the installation of protective safety anti-shatter blast films on windows, at historical buildings, at least 5 for the starting points, like Odesa Literature Museum, the Manuk Bay Mansion, which currently is also in use as a kindergarten, but also House of Scientists, the Museum of Literature, the Odesa Museum of Western and Eastern Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts, but urgent also geological and architectural studies necessary to inform the stabilization and conservation projects of some of this property, and last but not least, to enforce this efficiency of post-disaster emergency intervention among relevant stakeholders. Meanwhile, UNESCO will continue to engage with the World Heritage Site managers, local and national authorities, technical institutions, to devise urgent needs for assistance and how to respond, how to coordinate those efforts. There are already some activities more within an ongoing project generously financed by the people of Japan in coordination with the Ministry of Culture and Information Policies. Some urgent repairs will already be provided to the Odesa Stoliarsky State Music Lyceum in Odessa. And at the same time, UNESCO continue to advocate and coordinate for further mobilization of resources, mobilization of also of funding with further member states and donors. On two aspects I would like to mention, two aspects before giving you the floor for some questions, is that at general level UNESCO is continuing strengthening its monitoring platform for on damages and at a country level, and at the same time in line with the obligations foreseen within the 1954 Hague Convention, as agreed with the Ukrainian authority, UNESCO is developing a project proposal to conduct field training activities in Ukraine aimed at strengthening capacities of Ukrainian military forces and judicial personnel on the protection of cultural property. Last but not least, UNESCO recently recommended the inscription of the World Heritage in Danger list of two other Ukrainian sites, named in light of the threats to their conservation, and these two sites are Kiev, Santa Sofia Cathedral and related monastery building, Kiev Pesherk Lavra, and Lviv, the ensemble of the historic center. The final decision will be made by the World Heritage Committee at its forthcoming meeting in this September. I thank you very much for your attention, and I remain available for any question.
Чи є в когось запитання? Так, бачу.
Form Ivan Kosyakin. Obviously, UNESCO is more focused on reconstruction and rebuilding of World Heritage in Odessa. But I can't help asking you about, can your report that you're preparing for December be used in international courts as an evidence against, as an evidence for Russian aggression and war crimes against the heritage? And in addition, are there any legal mechanisms in UNESCO that will allow Ukraine to seek compensations from Russia? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. The ratification of the 1954 Hague Convention that we have been mentioning, and its two protocols, of 1954-99 protocols, and also the national implementation of the penal regime it contains, established in a way the prospects of sanctions on for crimes against cultural properties. So these international tools, they create, these among others, they create also obligations for state parties for sanctioning the destruction and the breach to the convention. So this legal framework, international legal framework, is offered by the 1954 convention, the protocols. UNESCO per se, does not have mandate to conduct investigation because it's secretariat of these tools. Instead, all the detailed documentation and this is to reply to your question, that UNESCO is issuing can be used by the appropriate bodies for criminalization of offenses to cultural heritage. And there are also some examples already in the past. And in particular, if in 2013, for instance, in the case of damage to the World Heritage Site and the Timbuktu in Mali mausoleum, which is a World Heritage Site, the documentation that UNESCO produced as amicus curiae with the International Criminal Court was used by International Criminal Court for these prosecutions issues. So the documentation can be used, this is one, and in terms of compensation, this specific case of Mali also give an example, because this was started in 2013. In 2016, there was the final sentence of this specific case. And in this case, for instance, through the compensation fund, UNESCO was asked to assist the country in restoring this damaged heritage.
Олександра Очман, РД.
Easy, but I'd like to ask you what UNESCO actually can do, or what UNESCO would like to do, if it was possible, in order to prevent further attacks on cultural sites.
Okay. I just spoke in English, thank you. So, heritage protection in the context of emergency and war is essential. We know that it's recognized now the role of culture in resilience, on strengthening resilience, preparing recovery, and it's even in important communities and social ties in time of war. So UNESCO has, and it's at core of its mandate, to support people, institutions, in reinforcing, strengthening their national system to protect heritage, and using its convention, which has been ratified by the country, also creating networking, and this is very important, peer-to-peer, continuing coordinating efforts. This is sometimes something that it seems look at very abstract, no, as coordination of what we waste time, but it's very essential. It's very essential, especially when there are many partners and also many contributions coming, and it's very important to have a shared action plan, a plan for what to do in this very short term. And this is something that UNESCO has been starting already since the full-scale invasion in February, working very closely with the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and also national and international partners. So far, 4 international coordination committees were carried out, where an action plan has been determined, and this also helped to federate assistance and to see where gaps are, and to also strengthen the efficiency of action. This is one side, so the implementation also of all the legal international tools which are there, strengthening of the capacity of country, and of course there is also an important operational part of intervention. So, which is really on how on the field be able to identify the threats, the risk, the vulnerability, and how to support actions, providing experts on the ground, creating this networking for immediate action, preventive actions, also to to prevent further attacks, and several actions.
Thank you. One more question.
Katerina Halko, Espresso. What is the total amount of damage in Odessa? Is there the total amount of damage in Ukraine? And what are the best ways to protect such historic places, taking into account previous experience? Thank you.
As I mentioned today, the UNESCO verified damage. And I stress the word verified, because damage are also all across the country, amount to more than 274 through all different categories. Historic and cultural buildings, monuments, archive, libraries, religious sites, museums, and also cluster urban spaces, sites more in general. In Odessa, as I mentioned, there is already a consistent, widespread recognition of damages, which it's around more than 50 specific buildings. Some of them, those which has been in particular visited by the UNESCO expert missions, are severe damages, meaning that the buildings are compromised for more than 60% and even more than 80%. So this is, but I would not focus on number only. I think it's very important also to take into account that even if it's one building, even if it's only one side, this is legacy of a community, a country, and worldwide, of all the entire community. So figures are very important, in particular to account for and for planning, prioritization of intervention. When we look also at the overall estimate, the Ukraine in particular has conducted as a joint effort, government, United Nations, World Bank, European Union, also a rapid damage and need assessment in February, where damage accounted and when UNESCO has been co-coordinating with Ministry of Culture the culture component of this report, and damages account for all the countries account to more than 2.5 billion. But the needs are almost 7 billion in the next 10 years. So this is where our focus also in terms of what next, what we can do should go. Because it's not only tangible heritage, but also how to reconstruct a fabric, how to support also capacity to cope with the magnitude of such destructions and damages. What can be done? Continuing certainly documenting, but with the finality of having clear costed plans, regularly updated, and to prepare in clear conservation plan, preventive plan, but repairs in time This for sure one. So, and UNESCO is being already during the year and even last year deployed, beside this work of monitoring, experts and missions has been assisted in doing repairs. For instance, already in Odesa in 2022 for the Museum of Fine Arts, the Museum of Modern Arts, in Kiev 4 museums, mostly more damaged museums, were assisted with urgent repairs, but also in other regions, in Sumy, in Chernihiv, in Zhytomyr, Kiev region. UNESCO has been conducted assessment for more than 22 sites to initiate, also to have plans, stabilization, conservation plans, and to prepare for later plans. One of these currently is also the Skovroda Museum in Kharkiv region, where we are now working very closely with the ministry, Kharkiv authority, also in preparing the stabilization and the very urgent protection plans, which will serve also after to be launched to initiate these works. So there is a very operational part, what needs to be done, and this is also what we did in other countries, like in Syria, like Sudan, like in Libya, for instance. But it's also very important work to continue in terms of marking sites, cultural and religious sites with the blue shield emblem, which give a recognition of their protection, and also to continue working within the framework of this convention to enhance the protection.
Дякую. Чи є ще в когось запитання?
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? If there are no further questions, thank you, Ms. Chiara, for your work. And with this, we're going to